of our country in our conference. In fairness, Marita has traveled this distance to participate in a session of the Executive Council of the Values Association that took place here in Moscow last Friday and Saturday. But still, we are extremely grateful and happy to welcome you here. So, please, Marita.
Thank you everyone. I'm really very happy to be here, and I'm speaking of happiness today in this lecture too. So thanks for the invitation. Happiness is a very complex issue, no doubt, and it's very difficult to define. But everybody knows if he or she is happy or not. And that is what we find when we ask these questions in the World Values Survey. And we've been doing that since 1980. In this presentation, during the 30 minutes, what I will try to do is divide it in 3 parts. First, like theoretical background in the sense of readings I made and those social scientists and philosophers who struck me more on the study of happiness and that took me to what we will see. And then the more empirical results from the World Values Survey, and to then turn to public policies. So, what is happiness? From Aristoteles from today. We won't stop a lot in Aristoteles because we all know what he said, but what he was saying in ancient Greece is that happiness is man's ultimate goal. And nobody seeks happiness to pursue other virtues or anything else except happiness in itself. And he thought that a good society would be one in which citizens are enabled to achieve eudaimonia, or flourishing, which means wisdom, aware, and reason. In a way, as a sum, happiness. He also thought that not everyone could aspire to attain happiness. But then we come to measuring happiness. And getting back to the English thinker Jeremy Bentham, he wrote towards the end of the 18th century that a fundamental action in his fragment of government is the greatest happiness of the greatest number. That is the measure of right and wrong. So he proposed understanding happiness as a process, but he introduced a felicit calculus, the measurement of our actions, whether they can lead to pleasure or sorrow. So he wanted to measure how much pleasure and pain with the aim of weighing which acts would have greater tendency towards goodness. Then, he was not the only one to tackle this issue. Many in the 19th century, but I would like to go to the economist and philosopher Francis Edgeworth and the mathematician Irving Fisher, which they conceived a device which they called the hedonometer. And they described it as an ideal instrument, a psychological machine, continually registering the height of pleasure experienced by an individual. Such a machine would help economists to bring closer the study of gross profit to the real world. Once we achieve this step, he said, having that machine would enable us to measure the amount of pleasure experienced by an individual. And the goal would be to extend it to the society as a whole. Fisher thought that the economists must no longer pay so much attention to the developments of other things, but watch instead people's choices to determine its levels of utility. But then came the genetic theory in the 20th century. And this was a proposal that we are built in a difference, and that much as half of the feeling of well-being is determined by genes, meaning that outside events have little impact on how we feel. This was strongly sustained by two philosopher professors, David Litkin and Og Tellegen. And they stated in 1996 that happiness was kind of a matter of good luck, of having, we were born with it, in a way. And they came to this conclusion with many analyses, but also following, they said that knowing the level of happiness and well-being of twins, for example, would be a more reliable clue to the well-being than the personal income or the academic achievement or the social standing. But this was strongly in a way, not refuted, but I mean discussed by Engelhardt, our father in the World Value Survey and founder. And in his paper in Genes, Culture and Democracy and Happiness, he pointed out that the differences between countries would be better understood if we study their historical and cultural legacy, which we've been doing in the World Value Survey. And the levels of happiness vary from one culture to other, and cultures are built by human beings, and that suggests that the pursuit of happiness is not entirely futile. Genes play a fundamental role, but values and beliefs are very and more important. This takes us to the psychologists, the positivists. Mihaly Mihaly is his first name, so for me it's easier to pronounce. So he said in his work Flow, the psychology of optimal experience, that people are happiest when they are in flow. Flow is a state in which you are completely involved in an activity for its own sake. The ego falls away, time flows, every action movement that follows inevitably from the previous one, like playing jazz. Your whole being is involved and you are using your skills to the utmost. To be frank, I must tell you a small anecdote. Yesterday, when we were working at the World Value Survey on the design of the questionnaire, we got so in flow that we forgot, or at least some of us, forgot to eat, forgot lunch. We were so in flow with what we are doing. So, finding a flow in work, or in what you are doing in life, is something that makes people happier. And he gives also, Mihaly, the example of chess players that many times achieve this state when they are very forward. So, following with this comes Martin Seligman. And Martin Seligman went one step further than Chimblesky, investigating and exploring the experience of flow and the loss of self-consciousness that is involved in acts of altruism, kindness, or this type of experiences. But he cast doubts on the word happiness as subject of scientific scrutiny, and he decided that it was better to use well-being. He says that there are 5 elements to well-being. One is positive emotion, which means feeling good, and this can only be assessed subjectively. The second one is engagement, being totally absorbed by one's activity. The third one is relationships, which means the presence of friends, family, intimacy, or social connection. Then the next one is meaning, belonging to, serving some bigger thing than one's self. And the last one is achievement, which means accomplishment that is pursued even when it brings no positive emotion, no meaning, and nothing in the way of positive relationships. And public policies are designed worldwide to optimize the material levels of the population in general. But according to Seligman, The only purpose of wealth creation must be the maximization of flow instead of encouraging mere accumulation or acceleration of consumption anxiety. This brings us to Barry Schwartz in a book which it's very easy to read, and I invite you to do so, which is called The Paradox of Choice, Why More is Less. He did a lot of studies, especially in the US, and he was analyzing that people really have so many options nowadays for everything, from food to electronics, retirement plans, dating services, whatever. The huge amount of available options is conspiring, he thinks, against the individual's true needs. And this, far from improving the quality of life, makes it worse. It could be called kind of the ambush of the excess. So this abundance of choice forces us to invest lots of time, energy into each decision, leaving us feeling more constrained than liberated. I think many of us must have experienced this in several times. That say, for example, I always sometimes have this feeling when you go say you need to buy something for a friend, and you know he or she likes perfumes. And well, just to give an example, there are so many perfumes that you really want to choose the best, so you start trying until you decide, but it takes a lot of time, and then you always maybe think, could be that I could have chosen something better, or the other one which was better. You won't have this, Barry Schwartz says, if you have between 5 and 10 options instead of 50 or 100. And then you have the neurologists, neuroscientists. One of the most famous one is Daniel Kahneman, who's a Nobel Prize. And he was studying how we make decisions and did a lot of studies on this. And he drew a line between perceptions derived from experience and perceptions derived from memories. And so he said, even though we have just one mind, there are two ways of making decisions. One linked to the present, and the other linked to the memory. The first takes decision with little effort and without feeling of voluntary control, while the second, the memory, is more rational and related to choice and concentration. There are two types of self, one that lives in the present and another in the memory. And he gives an example of people that were hearing a symphony and something like a big noise occurred at the end. And so there was a very different situation of the experience in all, which was until last time really very good, but the memory of the people, because of this, said that it was not a nice experience. So this takes us now to the empirical work that we've been doing since in 1980s. I would like to stress this because there are different studies on happiness and some very interesting empirical studies done. But we have the biggest track record because we've been asking two questions since the mid of the 80s. And these two questions are life satisfaction and happiness. We ask life satisfaction from 1 to 10, where 1 is not satisfied at all, and 10 is completely satisfied with scores, whatever score you want to put in the middle. And then we ask happiness. How happy would you say you are? Very happy, quite happy, somewhat happy, not very happy, and not happy at all. Through this, we built a subjective well-being index. And then what you have, and you will see, this is World Value Survey data, but if you take, say, the World Report, the World Happiness Report, which uses data from the World Value Survey, but also from Gallup Organization and the World Index, Happiness Index Planet, you will see that you will find differences in the sense that different countries get in, some have countries in and not others, but you will always find that in the top you will have always a kind of same type of regions and countries, like the Northern European countries and Latin America's rating high in happiness. Here we have, for example, Mexico, Colombia, Denmark, Uzbekistan, Qatar, Ecuador, Iceland, Switzerland, Ireland, and Norway on the first 10, followed by Canada, Great Britain, Ireland, and Belgium. And then we have a medium level, and then we could spend ages looking at this, but I will show you a map which is more helpful. And here you have the low-level countries, which are basically Egypt, Moldova, Bulgaria, Georgia, Palestine, Belarus, Serbia, Tunisia, Armenia, Ukraine. Getting back to what is happiness related, in general, people tend to think about GDP, and that, well, if countries have very strong GDPs, this would make people happier. So we built this map with an idea from Ron, and what we have down is PBB, and the horizontal axis is the GDP, and the subjective well-being index on the vertical axis. And we have many countries there, so it's not easy to read, but you can see here, like the Latin American countries and the northern countries. This is much clearer, and you see here the Nordic countries, here the Latin American countries, and here you see that the ex-communist countries. So it's very clear that these three regions share similar results among the countries that belong to them. But there are great differences among them. Latin American countries rank high in happiness, and they don't have high income. Nordic countries rate high in both categories, and the former Soviet Union republics are low or medium on both. So there are types of societies that bring different results regarding happiness and life satisfaction. And it's very interesting to try and understand why. One of the variables I want to point is this one of the GDP and income, which is a very tricky one. Being richer has in principle a direct correlation with happiness. But to what point? In 1974, Richard Esterling wrote an essay known afterwards as the Esterling paradox. And he pointed out that at one given moment, any given moment, people with higher incomes are happier than those with lesser ones in the same country. But he also highlighted that generally the happiness of a country does not go at the same pace that the rise in GDP. And he was right, looking at our map. To explain his paradox, he referred to the hypothesis of relative income, according to which people do not only look at their absolute income, but maybe more how well they perform regarding others, mainly their peers. He did a lot of research on this on the US, and then many years after, he was hugely criticized several times, and he did studies in 30 countries to now having data and using also our data that proved that this was true. So this is a very important issue that I would like to strengthen, and that has to do with what follows. In general, governments have been trying to track record of economic indicators and economic variables. There was some advances with the Human Development Index and other measures. But what I strongly believe, and there is a trend now going towards that way, is that we don't not only need objective measures like GDP, but we need subjective measures that we can work together and help us to design better policies. What factors correlate with happiness? What we find in the World Values Survey is that happiness is strongly correlated with family. If we are well in our family relations, and if we are connected with our friends and the people of our nearby, this is very highly correlated to happiness. The second factor that we find is health. Health meaning not only physical health, which of course is substantial, and it's a second factor, but also psychological health. The psychological health was paid much less attention during for a long time. And so now some countries are implementing programs on psychological sustaining, or programs to help people because our societies have become so stressing. There is a lot of anguish, a lot of stress, and this brings health problems and insatisfaction. The third one, and we talked about it, is income, which is also our financial situation, our economic home situation plays an important role. And then we have freedom. How much control and freedom we have of our life is highly correlated to happiness. And then we have work. A work not only meaning a good income, which then relates to income, but mostly people who, well, those who flow in work are very much happier, but it has to be a work where not only the external factors mind, which means higher vacations or good hours or even income, but the achievement, the sense of fulfillment, and the relations we build, the community we build in our work, and their creativity, and that we can use in it. Then the other factor is spirituality or religion. Say, for example, why are Latin American countries so happy? This is something that I've been trying to understand since it's my region. And basically, we have very strong family ties, very, very strong family ties, and also religion plays a role. But trust, which is highly correlated to happiness in many of the most all the Western, say, European countries or the Anglo-Saxon countries, does not correlate with happiness in a region. Though people who are trustworthy tend to be much happier. This has to do with a problem of social capital we have very strong relations in the immediate, those who are around us, and that is very strong and makes our life easier, because whatever problem we have, there is someone always that we can talk, that we can find support or what we need. But not trusting others in general makes political and economic performance very, very difficult. Well, those are the correlations that I won't show there. This is the same map I showed before. Now I will go to happiness and public policy. Well, a new paradigm has emerged over the last years, according to which public opinion policies must take into account objective well-being associated with economic growth and people's basic needs, as well as subjective well-being related to social capital and personal growth. This dual perspective, the idea of looking simultaneously to two different places, I found it in ancient Rome in the two-faced god of the gates, winter and summer. And as Hanno said, this model points to the two dimensions of well-being. In the end, there are two faces of the same coin, ourselves, the objective and the subjective. As I'm Argentinian, I can say it takes two to tango. The challenge is to strike the right balance among objective and subjective well-being. Well, we propose a simple matrix which combines elements related to objective well-being and elements related to subjective well-being. And put in those quadrants, what we are aiming to say, everything of those is absolutely necessary, but we will get to high objective well-being and high subjective well-being when we get here to the social well-being elements. We have to do mostly with sustainable development, social capital, and trust. What has been done and is being done? So, the aim is to put this issue on the agenda. Measures of subjective well-being must complement those of, we said that, of objective. In 2011, the General Assembly of the United Nations invited member states to pay special attention to happiness and well-being of its citizens in the public policies. And this does not mean that other economic goals should be abandoned, but rather that their relative importance must be carefully weighted, moreover, as absolute poverty is being eradicated. In the United Kingdom, where I lived 5 years, and it was during Tony Blair's period, and it's one of the things why I got so interested in happiness, because the people in the London School of Economics, led by Laird, were working with Blair in order to see if they could put these studies we were doing on to public policies, put them down to public policies. This was followed by Gordon Brown, and it's today followed also by Cameroon. In France, Sarkozy also invited a group of experts which were led by 2 Nobel Prizes, Joseph Stiglitz and Amartya Sen, to start measuring happiness of the French people in order to design public policies to make them happier. And then Holland also launched a report which is called Positive Economy, which he says it's a platform to develop relationships and create knowledge about an economy that seeks more than profits. While also Pope Francis is very strong for it, and saying we must free ourselves from the obsessions with economic profit, which attacks the human rhythm of life and denies men time to spend on what is really important, which we saw in the charts before, which those things are. So this approach has gained followers in diverse countries, such as also not only the UK, but Bolivia, Ecuador, Germany, Bhutan, New Zealand, Australia, Brazil, and many others. And we tend to a more integral and multidimensional conception of human beings instead of culture based on excess. To mention some examples that have been tried already, it has been found that unemployment has an impact on happiness higher than the loss of income it entails. And there are studies that also show that the impact of unemployment on happiness persists even after the problem is solved for a long time. Taking this into account, some academics suggest that unemployment funds must be used to create new jobs, even if the salaries are lower than that of the previous position, instead of using them to pay subsidies to people who are out of work. Also, we have mentioned the positive influence of happiness that living with a couple entails. People who are married or living couples are happier in general. It's not necessary, but it's related, than no. So some researchers have stressed that family values could be included in school curriculum. In some countries, like the Swedish, they have banned advertising for children under 12. And the Greek government has done the same regarding advertising of toys for kids under 13. We can influence the values that lead to happiness by transmitting them at school. For example, making clear the satisfaction with voluntary work and helping other people entails life satisfaction and happiness. And also that values such as tolerance for different people have strong correlations with happiness. So we must start teaching those things. We talked about mental illness already. Stress, depression, anguish have a negative correlation to subjective well-being. Many people suffer that nowadays, and this we should give an answer to that. Also, many programs at a city level to allow neighbors to establish closer and stronger bonds with the aim of raising the levels of trust in other people. This is something we must do strongly in Latin America, and I think this is the case in this country also. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have time for answers on the question. For questions and answers. Yes, please. Annie.
Marita, thank you for your presentation. You know, I'm Mexican. I agree, you are very happy. Now I'm living in this country and I can recognize that I'm not so happy. And you know, a lot of these factors that you say correlate with happiness and so on, I didn't see it the weather. Look outside. Snow good, first time good, second time good, third time good. When you know that we just know like that, and this weather, until the end of April, and I said, I'm going to go home. And I think that this geographical context should be a very relevant factor studying happiness. And I think that you should take into account, I would like to know your point of view, the role of this weather on happiness. I know that on the public policy is impossible to.
I can try to give an answer to that in this sense. We have the same feeling as you are saying when we look at, say, Central American countries, always great, very, very well in happiness, and the weather is great. But I've shown just now a map with the European northern countries, and we can have in Finland, say, for example, very, very bad weather and even very, very long nights. So we don't think that weather, and there were some experiments done also in the US saying people would move, so people move so much that if someone moves to California or moves to Miami, they think they will be happier, and it's not the case.
Thank you. We have a line of questions there. Let's start with Professor Kutelowski, right?
I have three brief comments. Is it working?
No,
I have three brief comments. The first one concerns the questions that you have reported upon. These are rather shallow ways of looking at deep concepts of happiness and well-being. Amartya Sen, in early stages of his career, collected data on ratings of happiness of widows that were supposed to be soon burned in accordance with all the customs. And these ratings were relatively high. So if we look at these questions, I have certain objections concerning the way the material has been analyzed. It seems to me that these are ordinal level variables. And in that case, even though the levels are numerical, in that case, it would make more sense to use something like Goodman-Kraskell association coefficient and look at how these two self-reported responses associate across a number of conditions. The second short comment concerning embedment of this concept of happiness in various other domains. There have been well-designed studies concerning the level of living in Scandinavia in the late 70s. It appears to me that the design of the studies was such that they constitute a notice export article in connection with matters of well-being. And the last comment is this. If it's really true what Kahneman says about these two types of decision-making, then the question is this. Can we make a distinction in survey work with respect to these two different perspectives that affect how the respondents react to our questions, whatever they are?
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you very much.
There are quite a few other questions coming
Or can
up.
I answer quickly?
Yeah, would you prefer to answer immediately?
Yeah, because then I don't remember. Sorry. Very shortly. Regarding the questions, they are subjective answers. And we get very low no responses, which is a good measure for us that the question is working. Everybody understands what we are asking, even though they can be maybe at some point thinking of different things, but they know if they are happy or not. And we ask two questions because of that, which are also highly correlated. One is more emitting like kind of emotion than the other, but it's highly correlated. So really, I think we have proofs that these questions are working. They are working for us. And regarding the Kahneman, which is something that thank you for the question because it's really fascinating. Well, it's multidisciplinary. So neuroscientists and psychologists are getting into it, and we are all working together. And Kahneman is actually now using the data, and at least he believes that comparing what we find in both things can add more value to the understanding of happiness. For example, there are some neuroscientific measures taken, experiments done on voluntary work and giving, and they find that the same thing that we find in our surveys, that people who give to others or are happier, tend to be happier, and they prove that also by other systems. Regarding Scandinavia, there are many Scandinavians which in the course of the day can answer.
Okay, Marita, is it okay if I take a batch of 3 questions at once?
Yes.
And then, yeah. Okay, so in the order of, there will be Rima Wilkes, Christian Nelson, and Olga Gulyeva.
Thank you for your, I really enjoyed your talk. You seem to be focusing on Latin America as the exception to the pattern. But I'm wondering, when I looked at that, whether the exception was the ex-Soviet, and if you could say a little more about the correlates of happiness in those places?
Yes. Thank you for that. Of course, yes, it's the two things shock in the same way. What happens is that really, yes, I focus and I understand what is happening in Latin America. I have a long way to go to understand yet what happens in these countries because I don't know as much the history and the cultural background, and I haven't looked at the data with the same emphasis. But I've been looking at some data on Russia, say, and for example here, happiness appears to be very, very correlated to health more than financial, for example, inclusive, and also to freedom, but not in the same way as in Latin American countries, not with trust. But I don't know, I can't explain very well why. I think it has to do a lot with the history, of maybe the history of what has been going on in this part of the world regarding expectation towards what finally happened, like a mismatch between expectations and what really is going on or given.
Chris?
Very fascinating, Marita. interesting results. I was always puzzled about the Latin American exceptionalism somehow. You mentioned as two factors that are really plausible, family ties combined with religiosity. That would apply to, I guess Darwish would agree with me, to Islamic culture as well, and they are not seeming to be very happy. So I wonder where the difference is. And one thing that came to my mind, and I was always thinking about that, when I know a lot of people from Latin America, and what about the openness of a culture, its welcomingness to fun and having pleasure? It seems to me that this is a feature where it is highly accepted and desirable to spend time, leisure time, to drink, dance, and sing in Latin American culture, whereas it appears to me that Islamic culture is almost the opposite. It has so many rules that are so rigid that tell you all the time, don't drink, don't do this, and do that. So there is a different approach to fun and pleasure, and that might also have something to do with that. That is deeply ingrained in cultures.
Yes, you can find some. To say this, I'm fascinated on this issue. There is a lot that I have to go on studying. But what I've been looking at is data regarding how people feel psychologically. And we find, say, for example, that people in Latin America are very kind of optimistic or happy or cheerful or so, but when they go down also. But say, for example, in European countries, Eastern European countries, people are more like, not like that, and never so on the top. How you explain that? I think it has a lot to do with connectedness, with the way people connect and how they take life. Latin Americans live very in the present, they feel very free in a way, and even though there are many problems, they don't take them so dramatically.
Thank you. Olga.
But it's not the main point. So could I ask you please to show the map where you have the first chart where the green and red, because my question begins with practical and then follows into theoretical. Just the very first one, when you have this beautiful map where you have green and here. The question that is more dramatic is the shift between Chile and Croatia, and where you have these first chances that rating 5 is Uzbekistan. And I think this differences that also measured by the qualities like family, health, and spirituality, we have very much down Italy and India, which are also known to be very strong connected, very much openness and have fun and have all of that pleasure type of thing, and the very religion and lifestyles that having fun and pleasures are very much part of the culture. So this is very difficult to explain. And also, theoretically, what I would then connect to is expectations. You mentioned the word, but they're not in the factors. And particularly with the Soviet, post-Soviet, and countries where they're undergoing dramatic changes, social, political environments, I believe, and I'm questioning you if you believe as well, is that it should be shown in perspective, in when it was, because Uzbekistan is Soviet, post-Soviet. Yes. If you look at Soviet Russia, everybody was happy. But after countries have opened and they start comparing their lives and styles with the rest of the world, it was dramatically that. Yes. So does it also have to do with expectations as one of the major factors? Yes. Not because it's not even mentioned, because the other definitions of happiness is also measuring expectations versus real experience. So isn't this a major thing, that what you expect would really happen?
Okay. Very shortly. Yes. We have trends. I should have shown trends also. It was 30 minutes, but we have the trends, which is fascinating. And regarding, in order to explain or for me to understand better what was going on in these countries, what I did is I called some experts, people I knew from the academy and then to try to help me to understand. And basically, the answer had to do with these expectations. say, what they were thinking would happen and what was promised regarding to, and so there was also, I don't know how to say, some nostalgia of the past in many of the answers I got.
So perhaps the last question is Darwish.
Thank you, Marita. We are here really trying to measure a concept that is really not only complex, but really part of the subjective, most part of the subjective, and it just takes different weight in different societies. I mean, thanks for actually bringing up this issue of whether actually, and being a closed society or open or religious or less religious. And I always thought actually that people who are more religious tend to be happier in the sense that actually they think that they have less control over this destiny. So there's no reason to worry. I mean, if I really did that God is running me the way He likes, and I can't do anything about it, then in a way I should be much happier, because then that takes the burden off my shoulder and I don't need to do anything. But I think it's really more complicated, and I think what I'm trying to say is that actually, even in societies that are open, they can do anything, let's take a Muslim society with actually same-sex marriages completely, you can have X number of girlfriends, you can change partner at any rate you like. That, I think, then the sense of happiness for that group of people is definitely different than the people actually who live in a different society where restricted rules.
Yeah, I think we are in a step where we have to do much more research on this, and that it's a topic that we should be looking at, these subjective well-being measures, in order, but what we find is there isn't such a correlation, big correlation, as we could have previously thought with GDP and economic factors only. It stresses the importance of cultural and historical and other type of factors that have to do with happiness, and that we should track them very deeply in order to understand more profoundly. But from what we know till now, there are some factors that appear on which we can start building on public policies. And we need, I mean, governments and academics and pollsters and to put these questions in, so that we can. The benefit we have in the World Value Survey, and that is why I believe strongly that this survey is so valuable, because it's the only one that can relate happiness to so many other things, to family, to leisure time, to environment issues, to work, to politics, to economics. But what we have to do. And here, Ron, if you can help me.
Very briefly, because I see there's a zero timeline. Darwish is absolutely right. Religious people do tend to be happier. To be specific, out of 83 countries, in 80 of them, not all of them, but in nearly all of them, religious people are happy. And one possibility is Latin America is kind of a sweet spot in historical times. Religion is not the only, of course, as you would expect. It's not by no means the only economic factor. All kinds of things that are into it. Latin America is at a kind of sweet spot right now, where it is still strongly religious, but also some of the things that modernization contributes to happiness are coming forth.
Yeah.
Gender equality, tolerance of gays and lesbians, generally openness to new norms that also are into happiness. So they kind of have a good balance between traditional and modern roots of happiness.
Yes. Yes, which is to say, yes. In your countries you have the religious more strongly, but you don't have so strong, but you differ greatly in these other issues that have changed very rapidly in Latin America in the past 5-10 years.
Well, there are no questions coming, but we unfortunately have no time for them. Maybe this discussion could be continued after the session. So thank you very much, Marita. Now we are breaking into two groups.